Okay, we are live. So welcome, Clint. I'm glad we're finally getting to do this. Very exciting.
No, it's great. I know we've talked about this for a few weeks and looking forward to the conversation.
Fantastic. So for our listeners, I'd love to hear a little bit of your background, kind of how did you get to this point and starting the Overton Group, and love to start there.
Sure. So just a little bit about myself. So, over 20 years as an operations executive, I spent a lot of time at the Fortune 100 level, and took a turn a few years back and kind of took an opportunity to get into the smaller space and VC-backed companies that are, Inc. 5000 listed. Really wanted to have an opportunity to kind of round out my experience and see, really quite frankly, what are the similarities and differences between those. And it was really kind of an interesting experience in the fact that, a lot of the fundamentals that you'll learn throughout your career really apply to organizations of all sizes and shapes. Earlier this year, I made a decision to kind of go down this path, really because of what I would call a career crossroads. Gave a lot of thought about what was important to me and what was next. Spent a little time really getting a little bit of headspace and thinking about what's the next chapter of my career. And there's really three things that I really utilized as a tenets for that decision. So I asked myself, what am I good at? What energizes me? And then how could I control the things that have been career dissatisfiers for me? And in particular, just really more of a function of having a little more control over what I do and who I do it with. And so to me, it seemed like a very natural progression to kind of take all those experiences and put them into effect, being able to help other companies that want help and are ready for help, and add value for them in terms of helping them achieve their objectives.
Yeah, amazing. And with that, you've launched the Overton Group. Can you give us a bit of an overview on the services that are being offered right now, and we can deep dive into some of those.
Sure. So really, there's kind of three core services that we're offering. The largest of those three is Fractional COO. So really think about that in terms of an organization who I would say is in some type of stress. And the way that I describe that is it can either be self-selected stress, where they're going towards a significant push in a growth strategy. They could be moving towards a sale or merger. Perhaps they are preparing for the next round of funding of their organization. And they're at a place where they recognize that they may not have kind of the talent in their organization to kind of help them get and build the bridge to accomplishing those. The other situation could be kind of the opposite. A business that's had some sustainable success in the past, but has finally kind of hit a barrier and a wall that they feel like they can't get over. So to me, that would be, instead of the positive stress of self-selected stress, distress, where perhaps investors or the board, or quite frankly, maybe the clients, are providing a very compelling case that what is happening in the organization isn't working anymore. And so to me, this is really an offering where you're able to get a really experienced, skilled operations executive at a fraction of the cost to really kind of help you get to where you need to, with a capability that maybe you really never thought was available to you before. And then the couple of other services that we offer, one is an operational health check. And quite frankly, in many of the engagements, I think that's really going to be what I would call the table setter for everything. And from my standpoint, I like to keep things simple, but it's really the idea of an independent assessment of your operation end to end, with a green, yellow, red scorecard that tells you, here's what we're doing well, here's where we need to improve, and here's where we haven't even gotten out of the starter's blocks yet, because maybe there's things that we don't recognize because of our knowledge and expertise that we need to be doing, that we should be doing to help ourselves get to the next level. And then the third, which is kind of an opportunity that can be very explicit in terms of an area or discipline within operations in an organization struggling with. Maybe they have relative strength in a lot of their optional processes, but maybe there's a fundamental or two that they really recognize they don't have the domain expertise within their organization. A few examples I would use there are, maybe they need to refine or define KPIs because the organizational strategy has changed and they really need to rethink what a measurement of success looks like. It could be the fact that they've recognized over a period of time that they're continuing to bump into themselves when they're implementing change in their organization, and they really don't know how to put a good change management framework in place to really create the type of discipline for success. And another example I like to use, which I think could probably resonate with a lot of businesses as well, is when and where do you utilize an outsourced service provider? And I think sometimes there's fear or perhaps poor experiences in the past that an organization might have. And so they really may need to have somebody coach them through the process of discerning what are the processes that really make sense to outsource. How do you select a provider? How do you negotiate the terms? And then how do you provide a good vendor oversight framework so you can feel confident and comfortable that those services are being delivered in the manner that you expect for your client? So those are kind of the three core. I mean, certainly there's other opportunities for us to do other for an organization, but those are kind of the three bread and butter things that our company provides for services.
Yeah, just fantastic. In the current economic environment, where do you see fractional executives, fractional COOs playing a role? You mentioned an event or a milestone. Can we double click a bit on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this was one of the things that influenced my decision of going this direction of opening the firm. I mean, beyond kind of the three tenets of things that were kind of important to me and energetic for me, the other was just the economic landscape. When I think about what's happened over the last few years, there's been tremendous growth in our economy. I mean, quite frankly, we went through a period of time, particularly in the early days of COVID, where I think there was a ton of uncertainty. And then before we knew it, the economy kind of took off in directions that we probably could have never did. And a lot of organizations who have been run reasonably well have been able to capitalize on that, growing substantially, and actually have been able to accumulate quite a bit of cash over this period of time. And you think about that group, and then you also think about the early stage businesses, the startup community. Right now I read something recently where there's really the largest amount of VC capital that we've really ever seen in the history of the country available now, that's kind of forward dedicated to funds, but has not been allocated out to businesses. And so I think about those situations, businesses that may be utilizing VC, or maybe businesses that have accumulated a lot of cash over the last few years, and they've grown, maybe in some cases, quite frankly, kind of in spite of themselves. They've been really good sales and marketers, but now because of the uncertainty in the market, they're looking under the hood and they're really rethinking what it means to have a sustainable organization, a sustainable operation, to really achieve success in kind of the highs and lows of the economy. And those organizations, in many cases, might be a little bit stuck when they look around the table of the people that they've had people that have kind of successful at getting them to a point, but not really capable of getting them to the next level. And the whole idea to me of the fractional executive is you get a type of talent that many small and middle market businesses would have never thought they had access to, by bringing them in and helping them really redefine their strategy and implement a strategy that's going to help them have sustainable success. So I think the opportunity is right for that. And I think the other thing I would say, Jason, is if you think about what's happened with the Great Resignation and how people are really rethinking how they want to work because of what's happened over the last couple of years, I think that people with a lot of experience and talent and expertise are rethinking how they want to work. And I think it's creating an opportunity for businesses to rethink how they might want to work with people that they never thought they could work with before. So I really feel like the time is really ripe for fractional leaders to come in and provide a lot of value for the middle market.
Change management, I know, is something that you chat about. You've launched a weekly insights and motivation newsletter on LinkedIn called Fraction. Can you speak to a bit more on the definition of change management and how is it applied in the current economic environment?
Absolutely. It's interesting, Jason. Just in personal experience, the last couple of businesses that I've had an opportunity to be a part of, organizations that are well over a decade old, that really have not had a change management framework in their organizations. And really, it's interesting. And an opportunity earlier this week to talk to several startups that are part of an accelerator program here locally. And we actually kind of had a chance to talk a little bit about change management. It was interesting in that conversation, all the things that they hadn't thought about in terms of the value proposition that comes along with some of the most simple things that I think really oftentimes organizations overlook. And so change management to me is really, I think about it in like very pragmatic terms. As a business, you make a decision to make a change. And that could be, again, change that you're making proactively or potentially reactively to what's happening in your market or your business. But there's a lot of different pieces and parts to your business that really need to be cohesive to ensure that that change is implemented successfully. And so to me, there's a few kind of underlying principles that come into change management. One is visibility. So make sure that everybody understands that a change is coming when it's proposed that it's going to come. Secondly is educating. So making sure that the stakeholders and impacted parties have an understanding of what's changing and why it's changing. 3, giving them the opportunity to go through some type of an assessment, oftentimes called an impact assessment, where you're really evaluating what might change in my team or my function. What are potentially the unintended consequences of this change? And then, once you get through that assessment process, then you're putting together a plan that's agreed upon by all the stakeholders, where everyone has confidence in success. And then you go through the implementation process and hopefully have some type of a QA process kind of to ensure that what you thought was what you intend to happen, you're well prepared for that. And then afterwards assessing the change and and making sure that the expected outcomes, what is actually happened, and then almost a rinse and repeat exercise. How do I learn from that? How do I make sure that the next time that we make a change that we continue to build upon that? And the beauty of that is that everyone has an opportunity to kind of collaborate, but you really don't bump into any unknowns. And you don't create any surprises for your clients, and you don't create any surprises for your teammates either.
In your most recent weekly insights, you talk a bit about organizational design. Can you define that for our audience and tie that to the change management journey?
Absolutely. I think that, in my personal experience, one of the things that has always been a significant influencer to success and short-term success when I've come in to lead an operation is really trying to understand where are we trying to go over the next 12, 18, 24 months, assessing the things that need to be accomplished, which then helps you understand the composition of expertise and seats that you need for your team. And then honestly, Jason, just kind of going through the process of really trying to be objective about the things that you need to accomplish, the talent that you have available, and identifying where you have folks that can potentially help you accomplish those things that, you know, may fit nicely and neatly into those seats that you know are necessary for go forward success. Perhaps moving somebody into a slightly different role that really gives them the opportunity to fully leverage their capabilities and the things that energize them, and maybe a set of skills and responsibilities that weren't needed or necessary previously. And then also help identify where you may have a glaring gap or hole in your organization that is going to be necessary for you to achieve the objectives that you've set forth going forward. And for me, that discipline is super important. One, especially when you're come into a team that's in some sort of stress, like we had described earlier, self-selected or distress, to really make sure that you have the right people on the field, so to speak, on your team to get things done. And it also becomes incredibly critical to the change process, because when you start thinking about where you're going as an organization, you're going through some type of evolution, which means on a pretty consistent basis, you're introducing new change in the environment. Having the right people to enable that through the right organizational design has a lot to do with your success or failure. And the other thing I just would kind of add quickly to this, as a matter of fact, I was having coffee with a gentleman this morning, and we kind of got into this conversation specifically around organizational design. And one of the things that I mentioned to him is that it really should be a routine, meaning that it's something that you should likely be doing every 6 months in your organization, and kind of reassessing, where are we trying to go? How are we going to get there? What talent do we have? And sometimes you may be moving those seats around a little bit, but I think it creates energy for your teams if you do it right. And it also really puts you in the best position to have ongoing success.
And I was going to ask that on the timing question. You've already answered. 6 months is when we have executives, division leaders, functional leaders asking these questions. And what we dive deeper, that actually lends itself to segues nicely to my next question, which is really, what questions are these C-level executives, division leaders, functional leaders asking themselves during this period of kind of contemplation?
In terms of really what the organizational design should look like specifically, Jason, is that your question?
Yeah, correct. So in terms of trying to understand whether or not they have a problem or not, I know in one of your most recent posts, you were talking a bit about just what questions are required in order for an individual to really recognize the fact that they do have an issue. And so it could be other questions, or it could be characteristics. What are we looking for in a CEO, division leader, or functional leader that is going to allow them to kind of get to the point where they realize, hey, you know what, I actually do have an issue?
Well, I think one of the things that is really critical for the diagnosis of that is, really having metrics that matter. And so to me, one of the things that's really critical to the hallmark of an organization, and you certainly can overdo it. I know that I've read some things here recently where people have posted about this, and I would tend to agree, is you can't have kind of paralysis by analysis. You have to be able to recognize, from an efficiency and effectiveness standpoint, how you're measuring the ease at which you accomplish the things that you are trying to accomplish as an organization, and make sure that you're mark, right? And so if you start with really the simplicity of the definitions of efficiency and effectiveness, and you think about your specific service and industry, and you start on what are the basic things that you need to be looking at every day to ensure that you're hitting the mark or not, and also ensuring that it is very well aligned to your organizational strategy and the run rates and targets that you have in your 12, 24, 36-month plan for your business. If you have those things set up and you have the right cadences and routines around them, then usually you'll be able to identify pretty quickly where you're stalling and where you have the biggest opportunity, right? And so kind of to your question around timing can be a function of making sure you have a good routine to do something kind of every 6 months at a minimum. But if you have the right metrics in place, it really helps you identify very quickly where you have potential risk to succeeding in things that you've set out to do, and hopefully allows you to rally and assess those things so that you can figure out what your improvement plan is going to be going forward.
Check. In your one of your recent updates on your LinkedIn newsletter, Fraction, you continue to dive deeper on this issue of reevaluating organizational design. You bring up again, for those listening, when you reevaluate your organization, there might be an event that's taking place. That event might be an internal opening, promotion, attrition, stifled attainment of organizational KPIs, some type of merger acquisition, perhaps a culture suffering, perhaps there's a transformative journey ahead, which would be a sale or next round of funding or turnaround. In each of these events, if you will, can you speak to the role that finance plays with, say, someone like yourself coming in to an organization? How do you work with finance when you're dealing with some of those issues I just outlined?
Yeah, I mean, I would tell you that in my personal experience as an operations leader, your finance partner is vital to your success. I mean, to me, it's the starting point for the assessment of any organization, because of the fact that they know kind of where all warts lie in the organization. They're able to kind of easily recognize where are the places that we're spending a lot of money, where have we lost control from an expense standpoint. They have visibility into things that, quite frankly, even individual conversations may not necessarily surface, because I've always kind of been, if you have the right numbers don't lie. And so your finance partner to me is super critical. In some cases, depending on the timing at which coming in and when they're coming in, the things that might have to happen is really just to create some alignment on how the financials are doing, so that you can really most effectively measure how the operation is performing in terms of financial execution. And once that's in place, it's really honestly very easy to diagnose as well where you have efficiency issues. And again, along with the key performance indicators, or OKRs, that you may use as an organization to look at your performance day to day, week to week, month to month, those things in combination really help identify at least a starting point for the questions that need to be asked on where changes may need to be made in your organization, in your processes, in your technology, etc.
So if I'm a C-suite listening to this, I'm a division leader, I'm a department head, a manager. What am I supposed to ask myself right now when I get off listening to this podcast? What questions should I examine around how do I evaluate whether or not I'm in a spot to bring someone like yourself on?
Well, I think one of the things that's really important, and I've given this a lot of thought, just based on personal experience in my career, is that the ability for change to happen oftentimes really starts with a lot of the decision makers having the ability to have some level of self-awareness. And, I think it's certainly understandable that we all have varying levels of egos, and sometimes those things can get in the way. But, somebody used a phrase a number of years ago that's always kind of stuck with me, and it's, what got you here won't get you there. And if you let your ego get in the way, if you're not able to admit when things are not getting better, if you're not willing to recognize the things that you are maybe not as strong at, or the things that aren't your core competency, and quite frankly, if you're just not willing to change and assume that things are going to get better, then you're going to really struggle, right? And so I think that what I would encourage any executive to do, especially any that are in those forms of stress that we talked about earlier, is just to ask the question, are we achieving the things that we need to achieve? Do my measurements of success, what story are they telling me? Do I have the right people in the right seats? And am I willing and able to make the tough decisions necessary in order for the organization to succeed? And in some cases, quite frankly, Jason, I mean, I think part of really great leadership is recognizing when you need help and being willing to ask for it.
With the recession, which hasn't yet been really called in a number of countries, but we know that there's been change in the air for 12 months, if not longer. And we've seen the tightening of budgets, whether you're an SME or you're a startup or you are a Fortune 100 company. We know that budgets are being cut. I do know in one of your recent posts, you talk a bit about the idea of spending money to save money, and that leaders fail to understand that they do need to spend money to save money. Can we spend some time double clicking on that for our audience?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, this goes back a little bit to the topic we just covered around willingness to make tough decisions, willingness to recognize that if we want things to change, that we have to do the difficult things in order for change to happen. And so, a couple of the things I wrote about recently, Jason, I think one is the fact that operational efficiency of an organization really is hypercritical, in particular during recessionary periods. And to me, if you have not been able to obtain that through other means, there are a couple of ways that you can attain it if you have the right resources available to you to do so. And to me, the two places that you do that, if you've not been able to achieve it in the past, are bringing in talent and expertise that you don't have within your organization to really independently assess where you're at and where you have opportunities to immediately take out expense. So sometimes spending that money in the short term also can have a fairly short-term ROI, because more often than not, there are low-hanging fruit expense saves that an organization can make related to how they're operating. And then secondly, bringing in that talent allows you to a couple things, really reassess the efficiency and effectiveness landscape of your business and identify places that you can invest that will truly hit your efficiency and effective objectives. And so that can include, once processes are properly aligned with your objectives and your strategy, really adding rocket fuel to those things with the right types of technology. And, if I was going to kind of tie this back to a little bit earlier of our conversation, I really feel like there's kind of two, if I was going to oversimplify, there's two kind of meaningful groups out there that I think have some really significant decisions to make. There are organizations that are going to choose to do what I just call batten down the hatches, right? I'm going to cut as much expense as I can. I'm going to put my head down, and I'm going to hope that the storm blows by and I'm able to survive, right? There's a second group that I think is forward thinking or could be forward thinking that says, you know what? We've done really well over the last number of years. We've made some good decisions. Others we may have done them differently if we would have thought through them differently originally. But we have either cash on hand and or investors who believe in us, and we have an opportunity to build a framework now not only can help us likely survive the waters over an elongated recessionary period if it would happen to happen, but just as much or more importantly, can allow us to kind of get catapulted ahead of our competition who may be in the batten down the hatches mode. And so I really think that, it really depends on philosophy, mindset, availability of capital. But I really do believe that this is a time where good businesses can decide to be great, and good businesses may actually fall back behind the crowd.
If I'm a division leader right now, I'm a sales leader of an organization, and I'm looking to continue to grow my business. Again, you mentioned this idea that there is a risk of sales becoming support. Can you speak a bit to that and how organizational design plays a role in supporting sales and also the bottom line?
Absolutely. It's interesting. I mean, I've seen this firsthand. I've seen this in organizations that are decades old. I see this as a challenge in businesses that are just kind of starting out as well. But it's certainly not uncommon early in the life cycle of a business because you're focused on expenses, you're trying to validate your product or service. Early on, your salesperson oftentimes can or does be your support person. And while that may be a kind of an early stage necessity to kind of getting yourself through those, first, important milestones of your business, it's critical sooner than later to really start to think about the importance of your fulfillment processes, your onboarding and service and support processes that come behind it. And, some things that kind of come to mind for me, Jason, are that if you think about the profitability of your business, and sales and marketing obviously is critical to the lifeblood of any organization. I'll be the first person to admit that. But a question that I posed in a recent, some recent commentary I put out was this idea that to ask yourself these questions: is the majority of your profit come when you point of sale? Does it come from referral? Does it come from recurring revenue? Those are kind of a few of the examples that I used. And I would argue a few things that if you're not focused in the long term around a thought out client experience, well executed process end to end, then a few things are going to happen. One is if your salesperson is constantly stuck in being your service person, they're going out and building a pipeline at the rate that they could. They're not closing as many deals as they could because their time is being committed, at least part and parcel, to answering questions for a customer. And then if organizations wait too long to do that, to move to a certain support model that's well thought out, oftentimes what ends up happening is you have a list of customers who have been onboarded with you, who have an experience of contacting their salesperson that you're now trying to transition to a new model. You likely have a lack of procedures or consistency in terms of how those customers have been serviced. And so the impact to the bottom line long run goes back to those first few examples I had. If you don't have a scalable, efficient, effective, and repeatable process downstream, over a period of time, I have this question. If the experience for the customer after point of sale is poor or inconsistent, are they going to rate you well and review you well in a way that's going to create enthusiasm in the marketplace for more people to come to your business? So I asked that question. The second question would be, if my business is based on recurring revenue and I can't create a consistent, well-defined client experience, my client, what's the likelihood that that client base is going to churn or not be retained? And third would be, I mean, just the simple question that I could ask you, Jason, if you had a bad experience with the product or service, would you refer somebody else?
I would not.
And so to me, it's so critical. It's oftentimes overlooked. And I've found organizations that been around for decades that they're still trying to get away from the salesperson being the support person. And it's not scalable, it's not sustainable, and quite frankly, it's really impacting the bottom line of the organizations where that's happening.
If someone wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to get in touch with the Overton Group?
Best way really is to go out to our website. It's overtongroup.llc.com. We have a contact us form right there at the top right-hand corner. Gives you an opportunity to provide your contact information, provide a little bit of information about the subject and your message. And what comes from that is, an introductory call where we have a chance to get to know one another, understand your business, what your challenges are. If we decide that we like each other and we want to continue the conversation, then we would move on to a discovery call where, we would be able to provide some thoughts around information and or data that would be helpful so that we could really have a productive conversation to really recognize where we could help. And then the third conversation would be, really, if we felt like we would keep things moving, which hopefully we would, is we would move into a proposal stage and we talk about one of those three services that we talked about at the beginning.
Perfect. I love it. Well, thanks for joining us today, Clint. I think this is the first of many conversations. Happy Veterans Day to you. And I know your family's been quite involved over the last century in protecting our freedoms and democracy. And we thank your family for their service. And I thank you for joining us today.
No, I enjoyed it. Thanks a lot for having me today. Look forward to some future conversations.